Before formally welcoming our speakers today, allow me to introduce Center for Studies of Plural Societies. It is an independent non-profit educational and research training center in New Delhi. It aims to train young minds to be open to diverse ideas, frameworks, approaches, and concepts, while also kind of engaging with, knowledge or its production. At CSPS, we believe that the space for meaningful dialogue is the only way to an empowered citizenry. And therefore, it aims to offer training and support in the spirit of a nuanced and analytical approach and objective method-based scientific research on all issues that arise or are at stake in a pluralist society like India. We have two wonderful and eminent scholars with us today. The eminent speaker for today's talk is Dr. Shakila Shamsu. Dr. Shakila Shamsu is currently advisor, special advisor, education policies at the Center for Public Policy and Research, and she was formerly OST, New Education Policy in the Department of Higher Education, Ministry of Education. She's been the secretary to the committee to draft National Education Policy and was also the nodal officer of the flagship Government of India scheme of NMTT, which is National Mission on Teachers and Training. New initiatives of leadership for academic program, LEAP, annual refresher program, which is ARPIT, ARPIT, and faculty induction programs. These are some of the major programs that were implemented during her tenure. Prior to this, she has held senior positions such as OSD 12th Plan in Ministry of Education and Joint Advisor Education in the Planning Commission. Her core areas cover education planning and policy making, teacher education, ICT and open and distance learning and inclusive education. And, we all know that her academic career spans over 39 years in teaching and academics at the University of Mumbai and Indira Gandhi National Open University, and over 14 years of collaborations in various positions with the Government of India. We also have a very eminent personality as the chair of this session, Professor Furqan Qamar. He's presently Professor of Management at the Center for Management Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. He has served as Secretary General of the Association of Indian Universities, which is the largest and one of the oldest networks of universities in the world. And in his illustrious career, Professor Qamar has held the position of the Vice Chancellor of the University of Rajasthan and the Central University of Himachal Pradesh. He has also served as the advisor on education again in the Planning Commission of India. Essentially, a professor of management is keen interest, research interest in public policy, in planning, administration, and financing of higher education. He has numerous publications in reputed journals, to his credit. He has chaired and has been a member of a large number of committees at the national level, working groups at the national and international level. So Professor Qamar, therefore, brings with him an academic eminence, leadership qualities, and exposure to best global practices. I am really delighted to welcome both of you, and really happy that you have taken out here, time from this really busy schedule to kind of talk on this very important issue, which is currently in debate across universities in the country. Over to you, Professor Qamar, as the chair, and you may take the session forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Vani. It's a pleasure to chair a session in which Dr. Shakila Shamsu is speaking. Shakila Shamsu has been a dear colleague at Planning Commission. I think our terms coincided for some time. And then if you are looking for one person who could update you, most of the new schemes that came into existence right from 2009 onwards, or maybe before, then Shakila Shamsu is the right person to explain the process, the reasons, the benefits that were envisaged in those schemes and how those schemes unfold. Not only that, if you are talking about national education policy, then she is the one person who has been a continuity in the whole process. So at that time, she was advising the Ministry of Education. At that time, it was Ministry of Human Resource Development. She was an OSD there, and she steered the whole process of consultation, preparation of various consultation documents, and then, of course, coordinating the whole report writing of the national education policy, maybe 2-3 reports by Subramaniam, late Mr. Subramaniam, and then Kasturi Rangan committee reports, and then reducing it to a 500-page document into 66-page document. So she has played a very, very important role in coordinating and bringing people around, and she is thoroughly familiar with what policy contains, what are the text of the policy, what is the context of the policy, what does policy aspires to. So I'm extremely delighted to be chairing this session, and thank you very much, Javed Saab and CSPS for this opportunity. At this moment, I'll not speak much because I'm afraid that post-lunch session, I should not make the audience sleep before the speaker speaks. So I will straight away request Dr. Shakila Shamsu to go ahead with her talk on the national education policy. I'll reserve my comments for the end. So over to you, Dr. Shakila Shamsu.
At the outset, I would firstly like to thank CSPS for having given this opportunity to share my thoughts on the national education policy, and also acknowledge the very kind words of our association with Dr. Kamar and his own take on my expertise in the handling of some of the Government of India schemes. And I think as an academician, I stand blessed for having that opportunity, like Dr. Kamar, who has also been in academics and had an opportunity to be in administration, educational administration. Now, the National Education Policy 2020 has, as Dr. Javed has mentioned, a lot of mixed reaction. And a large part of it stems from concerns that come in terms of whether it would encourage commercialization, whether we are making out a case for greater privatization, whether we would be able to address concerns of a pluralistic society, and whether we would really be able to look at a very holistic, integrated view of education, given the fact that education is a subject in the concurrent list, and many states are concerned about whether their autonomy to a great extent is getting affected. Now, having said the major concerns that are coming out, I would still like to put in perspective the fact that I am trying to sort of lay out the canvas that the policy envisages. And as all of us who are there in the field of education know, that what is sort of stated in a policy, the vision that comes out in a policy, may not necessarily resonate with the manner in which it gets implemented. So I think that caveat has to be kept in mind. And therefore, I am making out a strong case of what the policy has sought to espouse and the recommendations that it has sought to espouse. And I think it becomes very important that we understand it within the context in which it is being faced also. One, the fact that we are talking about a policy in this century, which has to handle the fact that we are in a globally connected society with the advent of information technologies, and more recently, the disruptive technologies, which challenge human intelligence and human capabilities. And given the fact that India has, as we have, the youngest youth population in the world, so to say, it becomes very, very critical that we empower the students, the educational institutions, and the faculty with the right kind of skills, competencies, and capabilities. Now, it is in this context, plus the fact that we moved from what we may say an information-based society to a knowledge-based society, which calls for the blurring of disciplinary boundaries and looking at differences between disciplines so as to make out a very strong case for integrated learning, and the case that we are putting forward at the class 6 stage that we call the middle stage, and in the higher education, what we have said as the multidisciplinary holistic education. It also resonates with the idea that a UNESCO report, which many of us may have read, referred to as the Deloitte Commission report, talks about learning in the 21st century as not being a unidimensional activity, being a multidimensional activity. The aspects of learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together and to live with others, and learning to be. So the NEP 20 in its articulation, in the very first chapter, talks about 22 cardinal principles, which ensures that the policy in itself is consistent in its recommendations, is cogent and coherent, and not intrinsically contradictory. And that becomes very, very significant in terms of those who would like to ensure that when it's implemented, these principles actually get really reflected even in the guidelines and the implementation strategies that we work out. And the whole idea of bringing about flexibility in choices be that of language, be that of curricular subjects, be that of the teaching learning methodologies, of assessment, of collaborating and partnerships with among Indian institutions, and also among different modes of learning, as well as foreign institutions, all stem from the fact that we are living in a highly individualized learning paradigm, and which has to recognize that every student or every child is quite unique with inherent capability, and should have an enabling mechanism allows that child to actually give vent or rather to optimize one's own talents and aspirations. So the NEP 20 must be understood in this contextualized scenario, and as a policy, which we as those who made the policy keep saying that it is not an evolution, but it has rather been a kind of revolution in terms of actually making structural and process-oriented changes. Now, if you don't implement that in its totality and you do piecemeal implementation, it is likely that the very spirit of that policy might get completely thwarted. And that is why I was trying to say that at the beginning, since we were those who made policy, those who are implementing policy, and because we did not bring out a plan of action, the same committee was not mandated to bring out a plan of action. You have a different set of people who are looking at the implementation. And that, in a certain sense, has certain, I would say, inherent weaknesses that come about. But nevertheless, as the policy, the NEP will be transformative in many ways. And I think all of us over here who have been beneficiaries of the previous policy and have gone through a system where we took discipline-specific degrees, when we move towards a case of multidisciplinarity, must be able to accept that it might be a challenge for the student, the faculty, and for the institution. But the NEP 2020 theoretically tried to put forward this whole idea that students have different tastes, talents, and therefore we should be allowing a huge bouquet of courses to be made available to them. And since we do not have comprehensive universities across the length and breadth of this country, you might have to actually start going into clustering of institutions. You also have to think in terms of allowing students to take them through online mode and through the ODL mode, all with the idea of actually trying to give opportunities to the students where multiple skill sets are required, and what we are calling as the 21st century skills, where the kind of jobs might require frequent changes, which calls for not just upgradation, but completely reinventing a new set of skills. And therefore, the multidisciplinarity might hold that student in good stead, because that student has a modicum of conceptual understanding and a modicum of certain skill sets that can be honed upon or that can be expanded upon as the job requirements might demand. And this is a reality, because I think we've all heard this, the kind of statements that we are having. We do not know what the jobs of tomorrow look like, and that every 7 years you may have to reinvent yourself for a new job profile. So if you are looking at a scenario which is so dynamic, and when you are preparing students who need to be future ready, a single discipline degree might be quite counterproductive. And that is the reason why we have made out a case for multidisciplinary undergraduate program with built-in flexibilities of the spirit of lifelong learning, allowing them to exit and re-enter with a multiple entry and exit. And making all this possible are two major instrumentalities. The idea of a digital bank of credit, an academic bank of credit, coupled with a national draft, and Furkanji here himself was the architect of the earlier draft National Higher Education Qualification Framework. And now there is a new evolved draft National Higher Education Qualification Framework, which will facilitate the student mobility across institutions, across modes of learning, and also take the benefit of the digital storehouse, which allows the student to do it over a period of about 7 years. So this whole pattern of the undergraduate program, in terms of the duration, which we have said can be 3 years or 4 years, allowing a student at every year to exit. And when exiting, where again there was a lot of flack that we drew, if a student does what currently, see, if you situate it in the current undergraduate program, then yes, the student passing out at the first year may be incapable of being called as having a valid certificate. But if you are looking at the new scenario where we say that a student exiting at first year and demanding that he should get a certificate must complete a mandatory internship. So the fact that the structure of an undergraduate program with common courses, with core courses, with what we have called very essential skills, digital skills, research skills, environment awareness, communication skills, all these aspects being interwoven, and not just as separate subjects, but interwoven within the existing curricula, creating active learning environments which provoke children or students to develop their problem-solving abilities, critical thinking, cognitive abilities, and work together in a team to have collaborative learning skills. These all taken together would really be quite different from the current package of an undergraduate program that we offer. Now, as I said at the beginning, understanding this spirit and putting an undergraduate program with this kind of new curricula and weaving in many of these new aspects, because we are being asked this question, what all can a young student start learning if you're going to talk about multi? We are not really saying that's, because we are talking about memory-based learning. When we talk in terms of the undergraduate program, the faculty have a major role as the drivers of that change. And I think Professor Kamar and myself and many of us as faculty, and I speak that as a teacher myself, we are in a certain comfort zone, and we are the most resistant to any kind of change in the way we conduct ourselves in a teaching learning transaction. The transaction today requires for the learner actually engaging with the curricula in a very active mode through group works, presentations, through quizzes, using technology, maybe gamification, and the faculty, unfortunately, not being so technologically savvy in terms of using all these tools and techniques, might tend to resort to traditional modes, which would never be able to sustain the motivation of a young learner of today, who fortunately is born in this century and who is being taught by someone of a previous century, and who's that kind of a generation gap is a different generation gap altogether. And so the NEP 2020 demands energized, motivated, capable faculty with a lot of, let us say, capacity building programs, which should not be the traditional orientation programs and refresher programs which go on
15 days and 21 days, and one after the other, you have resource persons who come and sort of actually bombard the participants with a lot of content, but hardly anything being asked from that participant to start doing things in the way you would really like 21st century classroom to look like. That is the whole crux of trying to say that unless, leave at all the UGC guidelines, the UGC, let me mention as of now, since the Heki bill is still in the wings and so on, the UGC is the one which is bringing out guidelines. So they brought out guidelines for an institutional development plan, the academic bank of credit. You have the UGC chairperson even mentioning now that the students now need to create that ID using the Aadhaar. Now these are the technicalities, and the UGC has brought out guidelines for the ABC, for institutions to onboard onto the ABC. The draft NHEQF is there. The draft National Credit Framework is up and there, which has integrated skills and higher education together to really make it, and right from the school education stage onwards, up to the higher education levels, up to the PhD levels. They have also brought out multiple entry and exit. They have also brought out how single discipline institutions can go on to become multidisciplinary institutions. So these guidelines are in a sense there as institutions to have a reference point and check with them and try and go about it. But who makes those enablers actually get translated? It's the educational leadership, it's the faculty, the civil society, it is the parents and the students coming together, all of them doing it in a very integrated, cooperative, collaborative manner. Now, unlike school education, where the criticality of the state government's role might be very, very significant, in the higher education space, because HEIs are autonomous bodies, they do have a freedom in terms of caring about curricular changes and academic changes, and they need not go right to the letter T because you only have model curriculum there. You can actually sort of carve out new curricula depending on regional needs, depending on what the labor market is asking, where are the faculty available, what are the programs that institutions in that vicinity are offering, so that we are not talking about any choice. We are talking about within an available set of choices. But it is possible to use these guidelines as enablers to do that. The drivers, as I said, are the faculty, are the leadership, the teams who are heading the institutions, be they directors or deans or vice chancellors. They are the ones who really need to, and this is where the gaps are being seen, because you find the resistance coming not just from the faculty, but also from the leaders who head these institutions, who are not open to these new kind of ideas, and who believe that because they survived in a certain scenario, these students also would, without understanding that the total ecosystem of jobs, of kind of skill sets required, of the need for having connections between school education, higher education, among disciplines, and this famous statement that employers are no longer looking at I-shaped graduates, but are looking at T-shaped graduates with depth and breadth kind of a thing. So students also have been given the kind of optimal learning environments where their multiple talents in dramatics, in let us say poetry, in sports, in many other avenues have got an opportunity to really be used in a certain sense. And we have, the policy has encouraged skill-based education, has encouraged open and distance learning with, of course, the need for quality assurance and so on, plus made out a case for internationalization. The policy, let me clarify over here, was very clear that we use the route. And I know Professor Kamar has written a lot in this regard, because we were also taken aback that a regulatory route was found out through a regulation to bring out for entry of work. When we know that in the past, we have seen efforts of trying to bring about foreign education providers bill not coming through, and the need in just as the policy has been in the formal participative, I think the part relating to implementing also has to be equally participative through healthy debates in the House of the Parliament, both the houses of the Parliament. And I think that aspect of the internationalization is something that is still yet to be finalized, but I think comments have been received. But otherwise, the policy makes out a strong case for faculty mobility, student mobility, allowing for Indian institutions to open campuses. Because I would like to really say to all those who've been criticizing this whole aspect of broadening internationalization, that we are encouraging unhealthy competition. Competition per se, I don't think is a bad word. Competition should be encouraged because competition pushes you towards excellence. But if you have different rules of the game operating, that is when the unfairness or the unfair method of competition comes. It's like playing a game of cricket and you can't keep changing the rules as the game progresses. The same way you cannot give a separate set of norms and then say internationalization puts a premium on foreign institutions and less premium on India. You have to have a level playing field, and so that there is a win-win situation on both sides. And even with regard to the aspect of setting up an international students office, I think we all as a globalized society feel that as part of even pluralistic and diverse societies, allowing for cultural minglings with foreign students coming onto our campus is a healthy and a desirable aspect. Many might not like to go into places which seem out of urbanized areas, so to say, because of the lack of infrastructure and so on. But I think broadly we need to encourage that. So I think on the research, yes, on the use of technology, because I don't want to really go too much into it. I'd like to hear Professor Kamar and then maybe interaction also, but leaving out the regulatory system and also on language. The policy makes out a strong case for multilingualism, allowing for higher education to be offered in regional languages. And that coming out of a feeling that in an agrarian-based society, where first-generation learners desist joining higher education because of the medium of instruction, this should be an enabler to allow them to join the system. And at no point of time, even in school education, when we talk about encouraging mother tongue education or home language, the idea is to relegate in the importance of English, because that has nowhere been said at all. In fact, this policy doesn't say anything mandatorily except in teacher education, where we have said by 2030 we'll close down standalone teacher education institutions. And I think that is just a reflection of Justice Verma Committee's report that teacher education must move towards multidisciplinary education, and we should not have standalone B.Ed education, which is a 2-year B.Ed program, because you don't get a holistic perspective. And that is the only one recommendation we have talked about, which is there is no sort of possibility of negotiating. It's a non-negotiable kind of a recommend. All others have a built-in flexibility, whether we also say that public and private institutions will have the same set of norms. We will not allow for commercialization. The not-for-profit will remain a not-for-profit. Though there may be a strong case to say that we need to sort of realize that the private sector is very much here, and we may have reasons to think that there is no harm in that. But as a country which still believes in the idea of socialism, I think, and the fact that it has a highly marginalized section, and the fact that we strive as a policy in chapter 6 and chapter 14 talk about equity and inclusion, I don't think we can sort of abandon that view and go in for a for-profit approach. It has been idea of being a kind of a not-for-profit and being a public service, so to say. So I think I'll stop here at the moment so that Professor Kamar can also interact and share his thoughts on what I have just said and his own views on the NEPLs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Shakila. I think you elaborated the process and the basic spirit in which the policy was made. And I think you clarified that the text and the way it is being implemented may not necessarily be the same. Before I say something, do we have some questions or comments from the participants?
My question is regarding 4-year UG course, as UGCF is now facilitated in Delhi University. But one of the scholars is doing research on UGCF curriculum. I have certain contact and confusion regarding this, because UG course में जो free exit और entry का जो question है, क्या वो प्रोफेशनल कोर्सेज में आएगा? जैसे कि 4 ईयर आईटेप कोर्स है, अभी वो फाउंडेशनल कोर्सेज में है, और क्या ये फ्यूचर में ट्रांसपेरेंट तरीके से जा पाएगा? क्या इसकी हम लॉजिस्टिक्स में जाएँ तो कहीं हमें इश्यूज़ दिखाई पड़ते हैं बहुत सारे, कि किस तरीके से सर ये आगे वैलिड तरीके से चल पाएगा? थोड़ा-सा ये कन्फ्यूज़न है कि कहीं हम डिप्लोमा दे करके एक अनएम्प्लॉयड, और कहीं हम ऐसा तो नहीं कर रहे हैं कि सर्टिफिकेट डिस्ट्रीब्यूट कर दे रहे हैं, फिर उन लोगों को कहाँ हम जॉब देंगे, उन डिप्लोमा और डिग्री होल्डर्स को जो 2 ईयर और 1 ईयर का लेके जाएगा? थोड़ा-सा सर ये पे मेरा एक रिसर्च क्वेश्चन है। थैंक यू सर।
Shakila, I think she
Yeah.
has some apprehensions about this.
Yeah. Actually, I think that has only been given because there are many who might like to exit in a course midway, and it might not, it is more seen as an exception rather than the rule. And therefore, a student induction program at the beginning of a 4-year program has to make it very clear that this, if there are who for specific reasons would like to take a break and rejoin without treating that student as a failure or a dropout, you have a 7-year window of period or time by which you can rejoin and complete. Now, this should be, we must be able to convince a learner that it is not to encourage more students moving out with certificates and diplomas. अच्छा डॉक्टर सुनीता जी, मैं ये कहना चाहती हूँ कि ये जब हमने रूल बनाया है, ये नहीं बनाया है कि जो 100 स्टूडेंट्स, हाइपोथेटिकली अगर 100 स्टूडेंट्स आपके एक अंडर ग्रेजुएट प्रोग्राम में है, ये हम इंडक्शन के टाइम में उन्हें बताना है कि हमने ये प्रोविजन इसलिए रखा है कि आप हो सकते हैं कि घर में कुछ प्रॉब्लम के वजह से, या फिर कोई फाइनेंशियल इश्यूज के वजह से, या कोई पर्सनल हेल्थ इश्यूज के वजह से, या फिर आप चाहते हैं कि नहीं मैं 1 साल का पढूं और फिर मैं जॉब मार्केट में देखने के बाद में वापस रिजॉइन करना, ये प्रोविजन निकल रहे हो तो आप अगर फर्स्ट ईयर में निकलना चाहोगे तो ये उन्हें ये भी बताना है कि आपके सेकेंड सेमेस्टर में एक इंटर्नशिप प्रोजेक्ट कंप्लीट करना पड़ेगा। आप बिना इंटर्नशिप एक सर्टिफिकेट नहीं मिल पाएंगे, और बिना इंटर्नशिप अगर आप छोड़ के जाएंगे तो आपका कोर्स भी इनकम्प्लीट ही माना जाएगा। लेकिन ये जब हमने ये रूल बनाया है, ये नहीं था माइंड में कि 100 बच्चों में सारे 100 बच्चे सर्टिफिकेट लेके निकल जाएंगे। देयर मे बी a few percentage, a very minuscule percentage, जो इस तरह से वो बेनिफिट ले सके वो प्रोविजन का। अब इसमें बहुत सारे चीजें ले रहे हैं कि हम इस तरह से जानकर ही कि सर्टेन माइनॉरिटीज को या सर्टेन मार्जिनलाइज सेक्शंस को हम इस तरह से कर रहे हैं कि वो जो एलिटिस्ट ग्रुप है वो पूरा करके चले जाएंगे और जो मार्जिनलाइज्ड है वो नहीं करेंगे। I don't think we need to read too much between the lines to say that, because it has not been related as having a correlation to caste or gender or community or language or any such thing. It is just a flexible provision कि आप 4 साल एक साथ नहीं करना चाहोगे, या अगर हमारा प्रोफेशनल कोर्स नहीं और 3 साल में ही डिग्री करना चाहोगे तो वो 2 साल के मास्टर्स करें। अगर 4 साल कर रहे तो आप 1 साल के मास्टर्स करोगे, और अगर 4 साल विद रिसर्च कर रहे तो आप मास्टर्स भी बिना किए आप पीएचडी को जा सकते हैं। ये हमने मल्टीपल ऑप्शंस रखे हुए, नॉट फॉर आवर विम और फैंसी, बट बिकॉज इट माइट बी बेनिफिशियल टू स्टूडेंट्स इन द लाइफ लॉन्ग लर्निंग एनवायरनमेंट। ये, एंड आई विल ऑल्सो एंड विथ ओनली वन लाइन, हाउ इंस्टीट्यूशंस इम्प्लीमेंट इट becomes really a matter of concern, because unless there is a very clear, there is clarity in how you will actually move this. That is why मैंने बताया कि यूजीसी के जो गाइडलाइंस है उसमें जो अभी जैसे हमने निकाला है कि आप क्लस्टरिंग में अगर करोगे तो जो टाइम टेबल भी आप फॉर्म करोगे तो 2 इंस्टीट्यूशंस के साथ मिलते हुए वो कमिटी का टाइम टेबल बनाया जाएगा, ताकि ऐसा ना हो कि मैं यहाँ डीयू से कर रही हूँ और मैं जामिया से दूसरा जब करे तो टाइम टेबल ही मैच नहीं हो रहा, तो इन इफेक्ट मैंने जामिया का कोर्स करने का मतलब देयर इज नो पॉसिबिलिटी दैट आई कैन कंप्लीट इट फ्रॉम जामिया एट ऑल। सो एज फार एज पॉसिबल गाइडलाइंस भी उसी लाइन से बनाया हुआ है, बट यस इम्प्लीमेंटेशन में इनिशियल स्टेजेस में हिकअप्स होंगे, दिक्कतें भी होंगे, but I don't think we should deter ourselves from not allowing the students to have this flexibility. और ITEP में अभी तक ITEP पायलट स्टेज में ही ऑफर किया है NCT ने, क्योंकि सुप्रीम कोर्ट का रिक्वायरमेंट है कि 1 साल पहले आप अनाउंस करना पड़ते हैं जब भी आपका बीएड नया फॉर्मेट में लेके आते हैं. तो ITEP अभी पायलट स्टेज में, पर जब भी लेके आ जाएंगे, I don't think there will be any student in ITEP program who will like to take an exit at the end of the first year or second year. I don't envisage that.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Anyone else? I'm sure that there will be many questions.
I do wish to ask a few clarifications, Mr. Kamal.
Please.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Shakila. Really, intriguing talk. But as a university instructor myself, I also have a few clarifications. Maybe we have received the policy and we are running the new. From this year we are doing the new education policy. So I have one or two conceptual questions and few institutional questions. So you talked about ecosystem. I think that's a very interesting kind of point that you make. And as a practitioner of education within the university system, I found that this is one of the major lacuna, because if a policy is created, it is imagined, it is designed as an ecosystem, right? But if it is merely a policy and the ecosystem is not put in place in the proper manner, then there is going to be a dysfunctional system, right, at the end of the day. And that's probably why there is so much anxiety and apprehension about the entire scenario. So one point I would like to hear your comments about is this. Second is that you did talk about within that ecosystem, there is also 2 points. One is, of course, of coordination between various, kind of hierarchies and domains that come within this ecosystem. And second is an important question of budgeting. Because when you do this kind of a transition, which is not merely a transition, but a leap altogether, right? You're leaving very old practices behind and moving towards a new world. Then, there's some kind of a budgeting and investment of that sort is also required in sufficient amount. That's a point that is attached to the ecosystem point that I was making. Another point that you talked about was about competition. And I know from working in this field, there is also a push towards internationalization, right? So within the Indian university system, there's a strong trust towards internationalization. If that happens, and many of us have studied abroad, and we know that, when, for example, in the degree program, you envisage something like an exchange program. Now the fee parity is too much. So somebody who comes to India, let's say, and pays in rupees for an exchange program, it might be much more easier for them to opt for India. But for an Indian student to actually do a semester abroad in euros, dollars, and pounds is actually quite a challenge. So are there any schemes which are going, are imagined as part of this ecosystem to kind of, substantiate this point further? Because there is a disparity between the developing and the developed world, and it is quite, openly reflected in the university system. And third point is conceptual, in terms of the entire project is argued as if it's an interdisciplinary project. As a kind of a student myself, the discussion that we have had within social sciences is that interdisciplinarity is not something which is out there. Interdisciplinarity is something which you arrive at yourself, right? Through a consistent and continuous engagement with multifarious topics, whatever is concerning you, and then you arrive at interdisciplinarity. So I'm thinking conceptually, methodologically, approach-wise, how is this education imagined where the interdisciplinarity is top-down rather than bottom-up? Or am I confused in understanding it? Thank you so much.
Dr. Javed, let me take up the last point first in terms of interdisciplinarity. When we talk about multidisciplinarity, it's not a sum total of discipline A plus B plus C plus D. First and foremost, let's understand that. And therefore, it is not taking up different departments and putting them together or kind of. We must also be aware of the fact that today, we faculty believe that the discipline I teach is the most sort of esoteric and the most beautiful one, and there is no other discipline that's more important or significant. I think that's a mindset we need to demolish, if I may use a very strong word. And therefore, you don't have faculty within departments talking to each other, leave it all talking with faculty from other departments. If we need to change, and since the nature of knowledge itself, Professor Yashpal has mentioned it way back in late 1980s, if I think, in his report of rejuvenation of higher education, the porosity of knowledge. And why do we still sit and believe that the knowledge is watertight, concretized into compartments? It has already evolved. All the disciplines are now engaging with one another. And therefore, if you ask a doctor why he is specializing in medico-legal cases, that's because the intersections between medicine and law have become, that's been happening across in many other ways also. So the fact that interdisciplinarity is not a sum total, the idea that multidisciplinarity would ask academic and start conversing with colleagues and with other departments and make the students appreciate, not because of the fact that we must go towards multidisciplinarity, but that student inherently likes to take up maybe sociology along with maybe a subject in pharmacy, or maybe learn a language, or maybe learn a sport or a music. And we have put this hierarchy of disciplines, and we believe that certain jobs alone are worthy of being chased, and the entire family is geared with its entire, I would say, mindset, how I could make my son or daughter an engineer or a doctor, and anything is possible to be sacrificed by the typical Indian middle class family. Now, that has to change. And we need to accept that there are many other professions which offer enough opportunities for our children to channelize their creativity, channelize their abilities, and so on. So that is the case, and it is not just there for a whim or a fancy. And I think the world has moved towards it. And if we don't realize this, we would be lagging behind. The other part about the ecosystem and the budget, and I'm saying that with someone like Professor Kamar over here, where we plan budgets, education budgets, and we are seeing a decline in the education budgets, no doubt. But if I may say the flip side of it, because having moved from Planning Commission to the ministry, if there is a scheme with about 90 crores, and the scheme that I handled it myself, the National Mission on Teachers and Teaching, I don't think at any point of time we utilize more than 60 to 80%. So the budget, in the terms of the allocation and its actual utilization, and where is that utilization happening? It is happening in the institution. How many of us as faculty were invited by the institution we worked to look at the budget or be a part of that budgeting exercise itself? So what you do, you have a budget, you put a 5% increase, and I know that because we'll do that. We'll say कि नहीं ये साल में इतना था बजट, अगले साल में हम चलो 3% बढ़ाएंगे या 5% बढ़ाएंगे. Actual में आप कितने खर्च कर पाए या कितने खर्च कर पाएंगे is a completely different stick. But I'm not justifying the budgetary cuts. Please understand that. And there is also a need that we use innovative ways in which we can leverage funds. Say, for example, a scheme which might require us to have modernized laboratories for vocational education. As part of the science, technology, and innovation policy with which also I was associated on the education vertical, we have said, can't the Department of Science and Technology take up this work of modernizing the laboratories rather than pitching that onto the education budget? And both Furkanji and myself will know from the Planning Commission part of it, when we look at these state plans, how some states very innovatively actually leverage funds from other budgets rather than the education head to draw the best out of it. So budgeting is important. We need to find out more ways of internal revenue generation. And we must also accept that the industry gains from the benefit of the higher education, but has not really invested so much that it should do. And that corporate sector participation report that we talked about, or the PPP models that Furkanji was an architect of, have not really been working in the manner that it should. So we have to find ways of doing it, including individualized philanthropy and alumni funding, which will come about. Now, coming to your first picture of the ecosystem. An ecosystem is a combination of many players who need to come together. And that is why in the policy, we talked of an instrumentality called the institutional development plan. It is nothing but a strategic plan of action for 3 years or 5 years, or max maybe 7 years or 10 years. And it has to be an evolving dynamic document, not a document made and put into the archives and forgotten about it altogether, like bulk of the government reports that. So the living document that needs to keep evolving with mid-course corrections. How many institutions are actually working in the light of NEP 2020 to start preparing an institutional development plan? That is the first step, which is a collegiate decision of the faculty, of the students, of the parents, of the scientific community, of the educationists, the civil society, industry in that area, coming together in a very, I would say, in a very democratized manner, exchanging thoughts and ideas and visualizing for oneself where I would like to see my institution going forward 3 years or 5 years. That creates a very healthy, workable, viable ecosystem. And I think rather than just all these concerns, that's why I said the leadership really matters, because we have this IDP idea and not many institutions are working on that, because once you start doing that, departments come together, sitting together and actually working with the institution, and the sense of investing in your own institution. How many of us feel invested into our own institution? We must think of our own individual growth, no doubt about it, but it should also be aligned to the institutional growth, and vice versa. An institution cannot think of its growth at the cost of the individual growth of its faculty or others who are there at that. So the stakeholders need to come together in a collective, collegiate manner, creating this instrument so that that ideal ecosystem we are talking about is created. At least I'm talking about at an HEI level. At the governmental level, of course, as I said, there would be issues in terms of state governments not accepting it because it's a matter in the concurrent list. And I don't think we would have the time really to work on that. Though I did do an attempt when I wrote this towards holistic implementation for AIU as part of it, where I have looked at how at the district level onwards, we can think of having a plan of action so that the district, the state, and the national level, what is possible, a matrix is created. There may be some parts you can do it as it is. There may be some parts, because no one size fits all in a country as vast and diverse as India. So I'll just leave it at that, Dr. Vani. I think I may have been able to sort of address some of your concerns.
So thank you very much, Dr. Shakila, for sharing your take on the policy and the challenges that we have in higher education.
Thank you, Professor Kamar, for these wonderful kind of post Dr. Shamsu's talk kind of comments. They have kind of enriched the discussion and put the larger NEP in a wider framework and given us food for thought. But it has also made us interested in organizing a larger panel on NEP, since this talk has only expose us to the idea that there is debate possible. Maybe we'll be in touch soon with a larger panel and a much more intense debate. Thank you, Dr. Shamsu. Thank you, Professor Kamar, and thank you to all the participants who took out time to join this session. I look forward to seeing you in many more programs of CSPS. Thank you very much and have a great day.